Hi, I'm Elena. At my 25th birthday party, my father stood up in front of everyone and said, "She'll die broke, just like her grandmother almost did." The room went silent. My stepmother smiled. My brother nodded in agreement. But what they didn't know was that Grandma Rose had left me something they'd been searching for their entire lives. One key, one mansion, one secret that would change everything. Want to know how I turned their cruelest prediction into their worst nightmare? The champagne bubbles caught the light from the crystal chandelier as I stood in the center of our family's ballroom, surrounded by faces I'd known my entire life. It was my 25th birthday, and according to family tradition, this was supposed to be the night I officially joined the Harrison family business empire, the night I'd finally earned my place at the table where decisions worth millions were made daily. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I wore the emerald dress Grandma Rose had given me for my 18th birthday, the one she said brought out my eyes. The fabric felt like armor that night, though I didn't know I'd need it. Around me, Houston's elite mingled with champagne flutes and practiced smiles, the kind of crowd my father, William Harrison, had spent decades cultivating. Oil executives, real estate moguls, tech entrepreneurs, all gathered to celebrate what was supposed to be my coronation into the family legacy. My stepmother, Patricia, glided through the crowd in her signature ice blue gown, playing the perfect hostess. She'd married my father when I was 12. 3 years after my mother died in that car accident. Patricia had a talent for making everything look effortless while calculating every detail. Tonight, she seemed particularly pleased with herself, checking her diamond watch with the satisfaction of someone whose plan was unfolding perfectly. My half-brother Marcus stood near the bar, 27 years old and already vice president of operations at Harrison Industries. He'd inherited our father's sharp jawline and Patricia's cold calculation. While I'd been away at Stanford studying business and environmental science, Marcus had been positioning himself as the natural heir to everything our great-grandfather had built from Texas oil fields. The moment I'd been dreading finally arrived, when my father tapped his champagne glass with a sterling silver knife. The crystal chimed like a bell, and conversations faded to expectant silence. William Harrison commanded attention effortlessly, his presence filling the room even when he wasn't speaking. At 58, he still looked like the powerful oil executive who'd graced magazine covers, though tonight his expression held something I couldn't quite read. "Friends, family, distinguished guests," he began, his voice carrying that familiar authority that had closed billion-dollar deals. "Tonight, we celebrate my daughter Elena's 25th birthday and what should have been a very special milestone in the Harrison family tradition." The phrase "should have been" sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't the speech I'd expected, the one about welcoming me into the family business, about carrying forward the legacy my great-grandfather had started when he struck oil in East Texas in 1952. "Elena has always been different," my father continued, and I noticed Patricia's smile grow wider. "While Marcus has shown the business acumen and dedication required to lead Harrison Industries into the future, Elena has chosen to pursue environmental studies, activism, and frankly, idealistic notions that have no place in our world." My cheeks burned as I felt hundreds of eyes studying my reaction. Some faces showed sympathy, others curiosity, and a few displayed the kind of satisfaction that comes from witnessing someone else's humiliation. I kept my expression neutral, the way Grandma Rose had taught me during those long summer afternoons when she'd shared stories about surviving in a world that didn't always welcome strong women. The Harrison family fortune was built on oil, on understanding that business requires tough decisions and practical thinking, my father said, his voice growing colder with each word. Elena's recent graduation thesis on sustainable energy alternatives to fossil fuel dependency shows a fundamental misunderstanding of what has made this family prosperous for 3 generations. I wanted to disappear, to find some way to leave, without causing a scene, but my legs felt rooted to the marble floor. This was supposed to be my night, my celebration, my welcome into the family I'd spent my entire life trying to prove myself worthy of joining. Therefore, my father announced, I'm officially naming Marcus as my sole heir and successor to Harrison Industries. The board has already been informed and has voted to approve this decision. The room erupted in polite applause, but I heard it as if from underwater. Marcus stepped forward, his smile triumphant, accepting congratulations from guests who moments before had been wishing me happy birthday. Patricia raised her glass in what she probably thought was a gracious gesture, but her eyes held pure victory. But my father wasn't finished. He raised his hand for silence, and when he spoke again, his words carved themselves into my memory forever. Elena will receive a modest trust fund, enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. But nothing more. She's chosen her path, and frankly, she'll probably die broke anyway, just like her grandmother almost did before I saved this family from her poor decisions. The reference to Grandma Rose hit me like a physical blow. Rose McKenna had been the strongest woman I'd ever known, the one who'd held our family together after my great-grandfather died, who'd fought tooth and nail to keep Harrison Industries alive during the recession of the 1980s. She'd died 2 years ago, and not a day passed that I didn't miss her fierce hugs and unwavering belief in me. Grandma Rose built half of what we have today, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. The room had gone completely silent, and even the waitstaff had stopped moving. My father's expression darkened. Rose McKenna nearly bankrupted this family, with her sentimental investments and refusal to adapt to changing markets. I spent the first decade of my leadership undoing the damage she caused. Elena has inherited that same impractical romanticism, which is exactly why she can't be trusted with our legacy. Patricia stepped closer to my father, slipping her arm through his in a gesture of support that felt like a declaration of war. Elena, darling, she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. We're not saying you can't be successful in your own way. Environmental consulting, perhaps? Teaching? There are many worthy paths that don't require the kind of ruthless decision-making that running a multi-billion-dollar corporation demands. The condescension in her tone was so thick I could taste it. Marcus joined them, creating a united front that made my isolation complete. Sister, he said, using the word like it was a courtesy rather than a blood bond. You've always been passionate about your causes. Maybe this is actually a blessing. You can pursue your dreams without the pressure of family expectations. I looked around the room at faces that had known me since childhood. Some showed embarrassment for me, others seemed relieved they weren't in my position, and a few appeared genuinely shocked by the public humiliation my own family was inflicting. But no one spoke up. No one challenged what was happening. This is my birthday party, I said quietly, but my voice carried in the silence. You invited all these people to watch you disown me. We're not disowning you, my father replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. We're simply being realistic about your strengths and limitations. You'll always be family, Elena, but you'll never be a Harrison in the way that matters for business. The weight of those words settled on my shoulders. Like lead, I'd spent my entire life trying to prove myself worthy of the Harrison name, working twice as hard as Marcus, getting better grades, studying abroad, learning languages, understanding markets and trends. And in one speech, my father had declared it all worthless. I thought about Grandma Rose, about the hours we'd spent in her garden talking about the family business, about the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about sustainable farming techniques and renewable energy investments. She'd always said I had vision, that I could see possibilities others missed. Tonight, I finally understood why my father had always seemed uncomfortable with our relationship. You know what, Dad? I said, setting my champagne glass on the nearest, a table with deliberate care. You're absolutely right about one thing. I am like Grandma Rose, and you're going to regret comparing that to weakness. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking against the marble with each step, Behind me, conversation gradually resumed as guests processed what they'd witnessed. Some would gossip about it for weeks, others would forget by morning, but I knew this moment would define my relationship with my family forever. As I reached the foyer, I heard Patricia's laugh, bright and musical, probably explaining to someone how difficult this must be for her, having a stepdaughter who couldn't understand. Practical realities. Marcus would be accepting more congratulations, solidifying his position as the responsible son who'd never caused his father public embarrassment. I retrieved my clutch from the coat check and stepped into the warm Houston evening. The valet brought my car around, a modest sedan I'd bought with my own money from summer internships. Nothing like the luxury vehicles my family preferred. As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, I caught a glimpse of the party continuing through the tall windows, life moving on as if my humiliation had been nothing more than a minor interruption. The drive to my apartment passed in a blur of city lights and half-formed thoughts. I kept replaying my father's words, looking for some hidden meaning, some way to interpret them that didn't feel like complete rejection. But there was no softening the blow. He'd made his choice, and it wasn't me. My apartment felt smaller than usual when I walked in, the silence more pronounced. I'd moved out of the family home after college, wanting independence, wanting to prove I could make it on my own. Tonight, that independence felt less like freedom and more like exile. I sat on my couch, still wearing the emerald dress, staring at the photo on my coffee table. It showed Grandma Rose and me in her garden, both of us laughing at something I couldn't remember. She was wearing her favorite yellow sun hat, the one she claimed brought good luck, and her hands were dirty from planting tomatoes. In the picture, she looked nothing like the woman my father had described as nearly bankrupting the family. She looked strong, capable, and absolutely certain of her place in the world. My phone buzzed with text messages from friends who'd been at the party, offering support and expressing shock at what they'd witnessed. A few family friends called, their voices careful and diplomatic, but I let everything go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk about what had happened, wasn't ready to analyze or process or plan my next move. Instead, I went to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box where I kept Grandma Rose's final gift to me. It was a small silver key, antique and delicate, attached to a chain she'd placed around my neck the day before she died. She'd been weak then, her voice barely a whisper, but her words had been clear. "This opens something they don't know about," she'd said, pressing the key into my palm. "When you're ready, when you really need it, you'll know what to do." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. I'd asked her what had opened, but she'd drifted off to sleep and she'd passed away that night. In the chaos of funeral arrangements and estate settlements, I'd never found what the key was meant for. The lawyers had been thorough, cataloging every asset, every piece of property, every investment. Nothing had been left undiscovered, or so everyone believed. Holding the key now, I felt something shift inside me. My father had compared me to Grandma Rose like it was an insult, but maybe he was more right than he knew. Maybe I was like her, in ways that mattered more than business degrees or quarterly reports. Maybe I'd inherited something from her that couldn't be measured in stock prices or board votes. The emerald dress suddenly felt too formal, too much like a costume from a life that no longer fit. I changed into jeans and a sweater, clothes that felt more like the person I actually was, rather than the person my family had expected me to become. As I hung up the dress, I noticed something I'd missed earlier in the evening's chaos. A small tear in the lining near the hem, and underneath it, something that crinkled like paper. My heart started racing as I carefully widened the tear and pulled out a folded piece of stationery, yellowed with age and covered in Grandma Rose's distinctive handwriting. The date at the top was from 3 weeks before she died, and my name was written across the envelope in her careful script. With trembling fingers, I opened the letter and began to read words that would change everything I thought I knew about my family, my inheritance, and the key I wore around my neck. My hands shook as I unfolded Grandma Rose's letter under the soft glow of my bedside lamp. Her handwriting, once so confident and flowing, showed the tremor of illness in her final weeks, but every word was deliberate and clear. My dearest Elena, it began. If you're reading this, then William has finally shown his true colors, and you understand why I never trusted him with the whole truth. The key I gave you opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank of Texas, downtown branch, box number 847. Inside, you'll find documents that prove something your father has spent 20 years trying to hide. I should have acted sooner, but I was protecting you. Now it's time you knew what really happened to our family's original estate. My pulse hammered as I read further. The Rosewood Mansion in River Oaks was never sold. It was stolen through legal manipulation after your great-grandfather's death. Your father convinced the probate court that I was mentally incompetent to manage the property, and Patricia's law firm handled the fraudulent transfer. They've been renting it out for 2 decades, collecting income that rightfully belongs to you. The proof is in the box. Use it wisely. All my love, Grandma Rose. I read the letter 3 times before the full weight of it settled in. The Rosewood Mansion was legendary in Houston circles, a sprawling estate built in the 1920s that had been featured in architectural magazines and society pages for decades. I'd driven past it countless times, never knowing it should have been ours. The current owners had turned it into an exclusive event venue, hosting charity galas and corporate functions that generated millions in revenue. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night researching everything I could find about the mansion, cross-referencing property records and news articles. The official story was that Rose McKenna had sold the property in 1998 to settle debts after her husband's death. The buyers were listed as Hampton Holdings, a company I couldn't find much information about, but the registered address looked familiar. When I finally traced it, my stomach dropped. It was the same building that housed Patricia's former law practice. By dawn, I was standing outside First National Bank, waiting for them to open. The safety deposit box required 2 keys, mine and the bank's, and when the metal drawer slid open, I understood why Grandma Rose had kept this secret for so long. Inside were contracts, forged documents, correspondence between Patricia and my father dating back to before their marriage, and most damning of all, a recording device with a note that said, "Play me first." The recording was scratchy, but I recognized the voices immediately. My father and Patricia, discussing how to handle the Rose problem and ensure that the girl never finds out about the true value of the estate. They talked about the mansion, like it was already theirs, discussing renovation plans and rental income projections while Grandma Rose was still alive. "Once Rose is gone, we'll have complete control." Patricia's voice was cold and calculating. "Elena will never think to question the will or the estate settlement. She trusts you completely." My father's response made my blood run cold. "The trust fund will keep her comfortable but dependent. She'll never have enough real money to cause problems. And by the time she figures out what we've done, it'll be too late to prove anything." I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at the evidence spread across my passenger seat. 27 years old, and I was just learning that my entire life had been built on lies. The modest trust fund my father had mentioned wasn't generosity. It was guilt money, a fraction of what should have rightfully been mine. My phone rang, jolting me from my thoughts. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment I considered not answering. But curiosity won out. "Elena." His voice was cautious, almost apologetic. "Look, about last night. Dad was harsh, but you have to understand the pressure he's under with the board. The environmental thing, it's just not practical for our business model." "Our business model?" I repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. "Since when is it our anything? I thought I was officially out." Marcus sighed. You're still family. Dad wants to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the details of your trust fund. Maybe work out some kind of consulting arrangement. Patricia thinks you could head up a new corporate responsibility division, focus on community outreach, that sort of thing. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. They wanted to give me a token position, something that sounded important, but had no real power or influence. A way to keep me close enough to monitor but far enough from actual decision-making to be harmless. Where? I asked, already knowing I needed to understand their next move. Dad's office at 3. Elena, just try to be reasonable, okay? This could be a good opportunity if you approach it right. After hanging up, I called in sick to my job at the environmental consulting firm where I'd been working since graduation. I needed time to process what I'd learned and figure out my next steps. The documents from the safety deposit box painted a picture of systematic theft that had been going on for decades, but I needed to understand the full scope before confronting anyone. I drove to River Oaks, parking across the street from the Rosewood Mansion. In daylight, it was even more magnificent than I'd remembered from childhood glimpses. The sprawling colonial revival architecture, the manicured gardens, the circular driveway lined with ancient oak trees. This should have been my inheritance, my grandmother's legacy, my birthright. A white Mercedes pulled into the driveway, and I watched a woman in an expensive suit emerge with a clipboard. She walked around the property with the confidence of an owner, checking details and making notes. According to my research, Rosewood Events was booked solid for the next 2 years, commanding premium prices for weddings and corporate functions. The revenue stream alone would have made me financially independent, exactly what my father had worked so hard to prevent. My phone buzzed with a text from my college roommate, Jessica. Saw the news about last night. Are you okay? Want to talk? The news. I'd forgotten that Houston society events were often covered by local media, especially when they involved prominent families like ours. I quickly searched online and found a brief mention in the Chronicle's Society section. Harrison oil heiress passes inheritance to son. The article was tactfully written, but made it clear that I'd been publicly disinherited in favor of Marcus. The shame hit me fresh. By now, everyone in our social circle would know what had happened. Friends, former classmates, business contacts, they'd all be talking about how Elena Harrison had been cut out of the family fortune. Some would express sympathy, others would speculate about what I'd done to deserve it, and a few would probably feel satisfied to see the privileged girl brought down to earth. At 3 o'clock, I walked into Harrison Industries headquarters for what I suspected would be the last time as a member of the family. The building was a gleaming testament to oil money, 40 stories of glass and steel rising from downtown Houston, like a monument to my great-grandfather's vision. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like ascending to my own execution. Patricia was waiting in my father's office, seated in one of the leather chairs facing his massive mahogany desk. She'd changed from her party dress into a sharp business suit, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun that made her look more like a prosecutor than a stepmother. Elena, she stood and offered a brief, perfunctory hug. I'm so glad you came. We need to clear the air about last night. My father remained seated behind his desk, a contract spread out in front of him. He looked tired, older than he had at the party, but his expression was unreadable. The office walls were lined with photos of oil rigs, business awards, and family. Pictures that prominently featured Marcus, but barely included me. Sit down, he said without preamble. We need to discuss your future. I took the chair farthest from Patricia, keeping my expression neutral despite the rage building in my chest. The evidence from the safety deposit box was locked in my car, but knowing what I knew made every word they spoke feel like another layer of deception. Last night was unfortunate, Patricia began, her voice smooth and practiced. Your father was under tremendous stress, and perhaps he was more blunt than necessary. But the fundamental issue remains. Harrison Industries needs leadership that understands our core business, and your environmental focus simply doesn't align with our objectives. However, my father interjected, sliding the contract across the desk, we're prepared to offer you a position that might better suit your interests. Director of Community Relations, with a focus on corporate citizenship and environmental compliance. It's a new division we're creating, reporting directly to Marcus. I picked up the contract but didn't read it. Reporting to Marcus. He'll be CEO within the year, my father said. It makes sense for all department heads to report through him. You'd have a budget for environmental initiatives, community partnerships, that sort of thing. The salary is quite generous. Patricia leaned forward, her expression artificially warm. Elena, this is a chance to pursue your passions while still being part of the family business. You could make a real difference in how we approach environmental responsibility. The offer was exactly what Marcus had predicted. A carefully crafted cage designed to look like opportunity. I'd be given a meaningless title, a small budget, and the illusion of influence while having no real power to change anything substantive. Worse, it would legitimize their narrative that I'd been given a fair chance and had chosen a lesser role. What about the trust fund? I asked, still not looking at the contract. Separate from this position, my father replied. The trust was established based on your grandmother's will and my interpretation of her wishes. It's modest, but sufficient for a comfortable lifestyle, assuming you live within reasonable means. The casual dismissal of Grandma Rose's wishes made my jaw clench. They had no idea I knew the truth about the will, about the mansion, about the decades of systematic theft they'd orchestrated. Part of me wanted to confront them immediately, to throw the evidence on the desk and watch their faces change as they realized their secret was exposed. But something held me back. Maybe it was Grandma Rose's voice in my head, reminding me that patience and strategy always beat emotional reactions. Maybe it was the understanding that I needed more than just evidence. I needed a plan that would not only expose their crimes, but ensure justice. I need time to think about this, I said, setting the contract back on the desk without signing it. Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course. But Elena, I hope you understand that this offer won't remain open indefinitely. The board expects decisions to be made promptly, and frankly, they're already questioning whether creating this position is necessary. The threat was subtle but clear. Accept their terms now, or risk losing even this token opportunity. It was the same kind of pressure they'd probably used on Grandma Rose, the slow squeeze of financial dependence designed to force compliance. I understand, I said, standing to leave. I'll have an answer for you soon. As I walked toward the door, my father called after me. Elena, whatever you decide, remember that family loyalty goes both ways. We've always taken care of you, and we always will, as long as you don't do anything to damage what we've built. The words hit me like a slap. Family loyalty, from the man who had conspired to steal my inheritance and gaslight me into believing it was normal. From the woman who had orchestrated legal fraud while pretending to love me like a daughter. I'll keep that in mind, I said without turning around. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought might still be in my corner. Uncle David, my father's younger brother, had always been the family rebel. He'd started his own tech company instead of joining Harrison Industries, and he'd never seemed impressed by the family's oil wealth. Elena, his voice was warm when he answered. I heard about last night. I'm sorry, kiddo, that was rough. Uncle David, can we meet? I need to ask you about some family history. There was a pause. What kind of history? The kind that involves Grandma Rose and the Rosewood Mansion. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was careful, guarded in a way I'd never heard before. Elena, some things are better left in the past. Your grandmother made her choices, and your father has spent years dealing with the consequences. My heart sank. Even Uncle David, The one family member I'd thought I could trust was part of the conspiracy. The isolation was complete. Everyone, who should have protected me, who should have fought for what was right, had chosen to go along with the lie. "I see," I said quietly. "I understand." "Elena, wait," he said quickly. "Look, why don't you come over for dinner tomorrow night? Sarah would love to see you, and we can talk. Just be careful what questions you ask and who you ask them to, okay?" After hanging up, I sat in my car in the parking garage beneath Harrison Industries, staring up at the concrete ceiling and trying to process the full scope of what I was facing. It wasn't just my father and Patricia. It was Uncle David, probably other family members, lawyers, accountants, an entire network of people who had participated in or turned a blind eye to the theft of my inheritance. But I wasn't the scared, dependent girl they thought I was. Grandma Rose had made sure of that, leaving me not just evidence of their crimes, but something else I was only beginning to understand. She'd given me the tools to fight back, and more importantly, she'd raised me to be the kind of woman who wouldn't back down from a fight that mattered. I drove home as the sun set over Houston, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. Tomorrow I will go to Uncle David's house and try to understand how deep this conspiracy went. But tonight, I had planned to do it. The war they'd started at my birthday party was just beginning, and they had no idea what kind of enemy they'd made. The dinner invitation to Uncle David's house felt like walking into a minefield. As I pulled into the driveway of his modern Austin stone home in Memorial, I noticed Patricia's silver Jaguar parked at the curb. My stomach clenched. This wasn't going to be the private family conversation I'd hoped for. Sarah answered the door, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. My aunt had always been kind to me, but tonight she seemed nervous, fidgeting with her wedding ring as she led me through the foyer. The house smelled of her famous lasagna, a recipe that usually made me feel welcome and loved. Tonight it felt like bait in a trap. "Elena, sweetheart," Uncle David called from the kitchen, his voice artificially cheerful. "Come on in. Patricia stopped by to discuss some family business, and we thought it might be good to all talk together." I found them seated at the breakfast nook, Patricia looking perfectly composed in casual designer clothes that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She'd positioned herself so the evening light from the window created a soft glow around her face, a calculated move I'd seen her make countless times during family gatherings. "Elena," Patricia stood and embraced me with practiced warmth. "I'm so glad David suggested this. We're all family here, and family should be able to work through disagreements." The word disagreements made my jaw clench, as if stealing my inheritance was simply a difference of opinion about investment strategies. Sarah served dinner with unusual quiet, her normal chatter replaced by careful politeness. Uncle David made small talk about my job, the weather, anything except what we were really there to discuss. Patricia smiled and nodded, playing the role of concerned stepmother while her eyes calculated my every reaction. Finally, as Sarah cleared the main course, Patricia set down her wine glass and leaned forward with the expression of someone about to deliver difficult but necessary news. "Elena, David, and I have been discussing your situation, and we're concerned about some of the questions you've been asking. Questions about your grandmother, about old family business that frankly should stay buried." "Buried," I repeated, keeping my voice level. "Like the truth about the Rosewood Mansion?" The silence that followed was deafening. Uncle David's fork clinked against his plate as he set it down with trembling hands. Sarah froze in the doorway, holding a stack of dirty dishes like she'd forgotten what she was doing. Patricia's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and predatory before she recovered her composure. "Elena, I don't know what you think you've discovered, but I'm afraid your grandmother filled your head with some very damaging fantasies before she died." "Fantasies," I said. "Is that what you call legal documents?" Uncle David cleared his throat, his face pale. "Elena, Your grandmother was unwell toward the end. The medications she was taking, the stress of losing your grandfather, it affected her judgment. She made some wild accusations that simply weren't based in reality. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. My uncle, who had bounced me on his knee as a child, who had taught me to ride a bike and helped me with math homework, was sitting there calling the woman who raised us all a liar. She wasn't crazy, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. She was protecting me from this, from all of you. Patricia reached across the table with false sympathy. Sweetheart, I understand why you want to believe her stories. Losing someone we love makes us want to honor their memory, even when they weren't thinking clearly. But Rose was bitter about the business decisions that had to be made after your great-grandfather died. She couldn't accept that selling the mansion was necessary to save the company. Selling it to who? I demanded. To Hampton Holdings? The company registered to your old law firm's address? The color drained from Patricia's face, but she recovered quickly. Elena, you're obviously upset and not thinking clearly. Maybe you should talk to someone, a professional who can help you process these feelings in a healthy way. The suggestion was delivered with such practiced concern that anyone listening would think she was genuinely worried about my mental health. But I heard the real message. Keep pushing, and we'll have you declared unstable just like we did to Grandma Rose. Are you suggesting I need psychiatric help because I'm asking questions about my inheritance? I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. Uncle David jumped in, his tone pleading. Elena, no one's questioning your mental health. We're just worried that you're letting grief and disappointment cloud your judgment. Your grandmother loved you, but she was also angry and confused in her final years. She saw conspiracies where there were just hard business decisions. Sarah finally moved from the doorway, setting the dishes on the counter with unnecessary force. Maybe I should make coffee, she said, her voice tight. That would be lovely, Patricia replied, never taking her eyes off me. Elena, I want you to know that despite everything, your father and I care about your well-being. We've always tried to protect you from the uglier realities of business and family dynamics. Protect me, I repeated, by lying to me my entire life. Patricia's smile turned sharp. By sparing you the burden of impossible expectations. Elena, even if every wild story your grandmother told you were true, what do you think you could do about it? You're 27 years old with no legal training, no business experience, and no real understanding of how complex financial transactions work. The dismissal was so complete, so casually cruel, that it took my breath away. She wasn't just denying my claims. She was telling me I was too stupid and powerless to matter even if I was right. Uncle David leaned forward, his expression earnest. Elena, I need you to understand something. The family has worked very hard to build and maintain our reputation in this city. Spreading unfounded accusations could damage not just your father's business, but all of our livelihoods. Is that really what you want? The threat was clear. Keep quiet or we'll destroy you financially and socially. They had the power, the connections, the resources to make my life miserable if I chose to fight them. What I want, I said slowly, is the truth. Patricia laughed, a sound like broken glass. The truth is that you're a privileged young woman who's never had to worry about money, never had to make hard choices, never had to take responsibility for anything more complicated than your college coursework. The truth is that your father has supported you your entire life, and this is how you repay him, with paranoid accusations and threats. I haven't made any threats, I pointed out. Haven't you? Patricia's eyes glittered. Coming here tonight, asking questions about old business, digging through family history that should stay private. What would you call that? Sarah returned with coffee, her hands shaking as she poured. The cups rattled against the saucers, the only sound in the suffocating silence that had settled over the room. Uncle David tried one more time, his voice gentle but firm. Elena, we love you. but you need to decide what kind of person you want to be. Someone who honors family loyalty and moves forward, or someone who destroys relationships chasing ghosts from the past. The ultimatum was delivered with the kind of paternal authority that had always made me want to please him, to be the good niece who didn't cause problems. But something had shifted inside me since reading Grandma Rose's letter. I could see the manipulation now, the way they used love and family obligation as weapons to maintain their control. "And if I choose to keep asking questions?" I asked. Patricia set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. "Then you'll find that the family support you've always taken for granted might not be as reliable as you thought. Financial support, social connections, professional references. These things depend on maintaining good relationships with the people who matter in your life." The threat was so blatant I almost laughed. They weren't even pretending to care about my well-being anymore. It was pure intimidation, the kind of power play I'd heard my father use on business rivals who got too close to inconvenient truths. "See?" I said, standing up from the table. "Well, thank you for being so honest about what really matters to this family." Uncle David rose as well, his face flushed. "Elena, don't leave like this. We can work something out. Find a way forward that makes everyone happy." "Everyone except Grandma Rose," I replied. "But I guess her happiness doesn't matter anymore. Does it?" Patricia's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the cold calculation underneath. "Rose is dead, Elena. The living have to make practical decisions. I suggest you learn that lesson before you do something you'll regret." I walked toward the door, my legs somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Sarah followed me, her face streaked with tears she was trying to hide. "Elena," she whispered as I reached for the door handle, "I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you, but David said it would only hurt you more. He said the past should stay buried." I turned to look at her, this woman who had been like a second mother to me, who had bandaged my scraped knees and celebrated my achievements. "How long have you known?" "Since the beginning," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I was there when the lawyers came to convince Rose to sell. I saw how they pressured her, how they made her feel like she had no choice. But David said fighting, it would destroy the family, tear everyone apart. The admission was like a knife to the heart. Even Sarah, who I'd thought was innocent in all this, had chosen to protect the conspiracy rather than protect me. "Thank you for telling me," I said, quietly. "At least now I know where I stand with everyone." I drove home through the empty Houston streets, my mind reeling from the evening's revelations. It wasn't just the theft of my inheritance anymore. It was the systematic gaslighting, the coordinated effort to make me believe I was crazy, ungrateful, powerless. They had turned my entire family into weapons against me, using their love and concern as a cover for threats and manipulation. Back in my apartment, I sat on my couch holding Grandma Rose's letter, reading her words again with new understanding. She hadn't just left me evidence of their crimes, she'd prepared me for this moment when I would have to choose between family loyalty and the truth. My phone buzzed with a text from my father. "Patricia told me about dinner. I'm disappointed, Elena. We've given you every opportunity to be reasonable. Don't force us to take steps we'd all prefer to avoid." The message was followed by another from Marcus. "Dad's really upset. Whatever game you think you're playing, it needs to stop. You're hurting people who love you." Then Uncle David. "Elena, please call me. We can fix this if you'll just listen to reason." And finally, Sarah. "I'm sorry. I should have been braver. I should have protected you like Rose wanted me to." I turned off my phone and sat in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of everything I'd thought I knew about my family. They had spent decades perfecting this system of control, using guilt and fear and false concern to keep anyone from questioning their authority. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated what Grandma Rose had taught me during those long afternoons in her garden, when she'd shared stories about women who had fought impossible battles and won. She hadn't just given me evidence of their crimes. She'd given me the strength to use it. I walked to my bedroom and opened the jewelry box where I kept her key, lifting it to catch the light from the street lamp outside my window. Tomorrow, I will go back to the bank and study every document in that safety deposit box. I would learn the names of lawyers and accountants and judges who had participated in the theft. I would trace every dollar that should have been mine. They thought they had broken me tonight, turned me into the scared, dependent girl they needed me to be. Instead, they had shown me exactly what I was fighting against: a system built on lies and maintained through psychological torture. The war was no longer about money or property. It was about justice for the woman who had loved me enough to plan my victory from beyond the grave. And I was going to make sure she got it, no matter what it cost me. As I fell asleep that night, I could almost hear Grandma Rose's voice whispering the words she used to say when I was afraid of the dark. "Don't you worry, sweet girl. The sun always rises, and the truth always wins. You just have to be brave enough to wait for dawn." Dawn was coming, and I was ready for it. The morning after the dinner ambush, I woke with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of confusion and self-doubt that had clouded my thinking since the birthday party was gone, replaced by cold determination. I made coffee and spread Grandma Rose's documents across my dining table like pieces of a puzzle I was finally ready to solve. The first step was understanding exactly what had been stolen from me. The Rosewood Mansion was just the beginning. According to the paperwork in the safety deposit box, there had been other properties, investments, and assets that should have passed to me through Grandma Rose's estate. A portfolio worth at least $50 million had been systematically transferred to Hampton Holdings and other shell companies controlled by my father and Patricia. I spent the morning creating a timeline, cross-referencing dates and transactions, with events I remembered from my childhood. The pattern was chilling in its precision. Every transfer had occurred during periods when Grandma Rose was either hospitalized or dealing with my grandfather's illness, times when she was vulnerable and distracted. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Jessica's name appeared on the screen, and I realized I hadn't spoken to my best friend since the birthday party disaster. "Elena, thank God." Jessica's voice was tight with worry. "I've been trying to reach you for days. Are you okay? The rumors flying around this city are insane." "What kind of rumors?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew. "People are saying, you had some kind of breakdown at your birthday party, that you've been making wild accusations against your family. Miranda Kellaway told me her mother heard you've been threatening legal action over imaginary inheritance claims." My stomach clenched. The character assassination had already begun, and it was spreading through Houston's social circles like wildfire. By the time I was ready to present my evidence, public opinion would already be poisoned against me. "Jessica, can we meet? I need someone I can trust, and I need to show you something important." We arranged to meet at a small cafe in Montrose, far from the River Oaks bubble where gossip traveled faster than news. Jessica was already there when I arrived, her auburn hair pulled back in a messy bun, worry lines creasing her forehead. "You look terrible," she said without preamble, standing to hug me. "When's the last time you slept?" I slid into the booth, across from her, pulling out a folder containing copies of the most damning documents. "I need you to look at these and tell me if I'm losing my mind." Jessica had been my roommate at Stanford, where she'd studied journalism before becoming an investigative reporter for the Houston Chronicle. If anyone could help me understand the legal implications of what I'd discovered, it was her. She read, in silence, her expression growing more serious with each page. When she reached the recording transcript, her eyes widened. "Elena, this is massive. This isn't just inheritance fraud. This is conspiracy, document forgery, possibly racketeering. How long has this been going on?" 25 years, maybe longer, I said. ever since my great-grandfather died. Jessica leaned back, running her hands through her hair. Okay, so what's your plan? Because if even half of this is true, you're not just fighting your family, you're fighting a criminal enterprise with connections throughout the legal and business community. The weight of her words settled on me like lead. I'd been thinking about this as a family dispute, but Jessica was right. This was organized crime disguised as estate planning. I don't know yet, I admitted. I was hoping you might have some ideas. Jessica pulled out her phone and started typing. I know someone who might be able to help. Victoria Chen. She's a forensic accountant who specializes in financial fraud cases. She's worked with the FBI on white-collar crime investigations. Can we trust her? With our lives, Jessica said firmly. She exposed that corruption ring in the city government last year. If there's anyone who can trace dirty money through shell companies, it's Victoria. While Jessica made the call, I studied the other customers in the cafe, paranoid now about who might be watching or listening. The conversation with Uncle David had shown me how deep the conspiracy went, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being monitored. Jessica hung up and leaned forward. Victoria can see us this afternoon, but Elena, I have to ask. Are you sure you want to do this? Once you start down this path, there's no going back. Your family has serious money and power. They could make your life very difficult. They already have, I said. The question is whether I'm going to let them get away with it. Victoria Chen's office was in a nondescript building downtown, the kind of place where serious work happened, away from prying eyes. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she didn't waste time on small talk. Jessica told me this involves your family's business empire, Victoria said as we settled into chairs around her conference table. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something. If what you're alleging is true, we're not just talking about civil litigation. This could result in criminal charges. I nodded. I understand. Victoria spread my documents across the table, adding her own notes as she reviewed each one. Her questions were precise and technical, probing details I hadn't even considered. How many people had access to Grandma Rose's personal papers? Who else knew about the shell companies? What was the exact timeline of my grandfather's illness relative to the property transfers? After 2 hours of analysis, Victoria sat back with a grim expression. This is sophisticated financial fraud, orchestrated over decades. The shell companies are layered through multiple jurisdictions, designed to make tracking the money nearly impossible. But they made mistakes. What kind of mistakes? Jessica asked. The forged signatures, for one. Document authentication has come a long way since the 1990s. If we can prove those signatures are fake, it unravels the entire scheme. Also, the timing of the transfers. They all happened during very specific windows when your grandmother was hospitalized or otherwise incapacitated. That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern that suggests premeditation. Victoria pulled out a legal pad and started sketching a diagram. Here's what I think happened. Your stepmother's law firm created the shell companies before she even married. Your father. This was planned from the beginning. The marriage wasn't just about love. It was about gaining legal access to family assets. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Patricia hadn't just taken advantage of opportunities. She'd engineered the entire situation. Her relationship with my father, her integration into our family, even her kindness to me as a child, had all been part of a long-term con. How do we prove it? I asked. We follow the money, Victoria said. Shell companies have to file paperwork, pay taxes, maintain business licenses. Someone had to sign those documents, and those signatures can be traced. We also need to look at who benefited from the rental income from the mansion and the other properties. If we can show a pattern of money flowing to your father and stepmother, we can establish a motive. Jessica had been taking notes throughout the conversation. What about the recording Elena found? Her father and Patricia discussing the theft. That's complicated, Victoria admitted. Depending on how it was made and whether it was obtained legally, it might not be admissible in court, but it could be useful for understanding their methods and finding other evidence. As we prepared to leave, Victoria handed me her card. Elena, I need you to think carefully about whether you want to pursue this. Once I start digging into financial records, word will get out. Your family will know you're investigating them, and they'll likely take steps to protect themselves. What kind of steps? I asked. Destroying evidence, moving assets offshore, discrediting you publicly. These people have been planning for decades. They probably have contingency plans for if someone discovered their scheme. The drive home was quiet, both Jessica and I processing the magnitude of what we'd learned. The theft was even more extensive than I'd realized, and the people behind it were more dangerous than I'd imagined. Are you scared? Jessica asked as we pulled into my apartment complex. Terrified, I admitted, but also angry. They stole 25 years of my life, made me believe I was lucky to get whatever scraps they threw my way. Grandma Rose died thinking her life's work had been destroyed, never knowing I'd eventually find the truth. That evening, I called in sick to work again and spent hours reading through legal websites, trying to understand the criminal implications of what my family had done. Wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, the potential charges were serious enough to put them in federal prison for decades. But Victoria was right about one thing. Once I started this process, there would be no going back. My family would use every resource at their disposal to destroy me, and they had resources I couldn't even imagine. I was still debating my next move when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging or you'll find more than you bargained. 4. My blood ran cold. Someone was watching me, knew about my investigation, and was willing to threaten me directly. I screenshot the message and forwarded it to Jessica, then double-checked that my apartment door was locked. The threatening text was followed by an email to my work account, apparently from a concerned colleague, suggesting that I might be experiencing psychological difficulties and should consider taking extended leave for my mental health. When I called the colleague to ask about it, she denied sending any such email. By midnight, I'd received 3 more anonymous messages, each more menacing than the last. Someone had also left a dead bird on my doorstep, a message that was impossible to misinterpret. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, holding Grandma Rose's letter and trying to channel her strength. She'd faced these same people, had dealt with their threats and intimidation for years, before finally hiding the evidence I needed to expose them. The phone rang, startling me so badly I nearly dropped the letter. Jessica's name appeared on the screen. Elena, are you okay? I've been getting weird calls all evening, people asking questions about you, about what we discussed today. I think someone's trying to find out what you know. They're threatening me too, I said, telling her about the messages and the dead bird. That's it, Jessica said firmly. You're not staying there tonight. Pack a bag and come to my place. We need to think about getting you somewhere safe while we figure out our next move. As I threw clothes into an overnight bag, I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't cross. The investigation had moved beyond gathering evidence. It had become a matter of survival. My family wasn't just trying to hide their crimes anymore. They were actively trying to silence me. But as I grabbed Grandma Rose's documents and headed for the door, I felt something I hadn't experienced since the birthday party. Hope. They were scared enough to threaten me, which meant they knew I'd found something that could destroy them. The war was escalating, but for the first time, I wasn't fighting it alone. And I was starting to understand that the key Grandma Rose had left me wasn't just about opening a safety deposit box. It was about unlocking the courage to fight back against people who thought they were untouchable. Tomorrow, I would make the decision that would determine whether justice finally came for the woman who'd loved me enough to plan my victory from. beyond the grave. Tonight, I just had to survive long enough to see the sunrise. Jessica's guest bedroom felt like a war room by the third day. We'd covered every surface with documents, photographs, and legal research. Victoria Chen had joined us that morning, bringing her laptop and 3 boxes of files that painted an even darker picture of my family's criminal enterprise. "The shell companies go back further than we thought," Victoria announced, spreading out a complex flowchart she'd created. Hampton Holdings was just the beginning. There are at least 12 interconnected entities, some registered in Delaware, others in Nevada, one in the Cayman Islands. They've been moving money through these companies for 30 years. I stared at the web of corporate entities, each one representing another layer of deception. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimate? $80 million in assets that should have been part of your grandmother's estate. That's not including the income generated over the decades from rental properties, investments, and business ventures. Jessica whistled low. Elena, you're not just the rightful heir to a mansion. You're supposed to be worth more than your father. The number was staggering, but what hit me harder was the realization of how systematically I'd been impoverished. Every birthday when I'd received a modest check, every Christmas when Marcus got expensive gifts while I got thoughtful but inexpensive ones, every conversation about my future where financial limitations were assumed, it had all been orchestrated to keep me dependent and grateful for scraps. There's more, Victoria continued, pulling out a thick folder. I've been tracing the signatures on the fraudulent documents. Patricia didn't just forge your grandmother's signature. She forged yours too, on several occasions when you were a minor. There are property transfers and investment decisions that were supposedly made with your consent, but you would have been 15 or 16 at the time. My hands started shaking as I looked at copies of documents bearing my signature. Papers I'd never seen before authorizing the sale of assets I didn't even know I owned. The violation felt deeper than theft. It was identity fraud that had shaped my entire understanding of my place in the world. How is this even legal? I asked. It's not, Victoria said firmly. This is federal crime territory. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, money laundering. The statute of limitations has run out on some of the earlier crimes, but the ongoing nature of the fraud means charges can still be filed. Jessica had been quiet, typing furiously on her laptop. I've been researching Patricia's background, trying to understand how she orchestrated all this. You guys need to see what I found. She turned her screen toward us, showing a newspaper article from 1995. The headline read, "Local Attorney Disciplined for Client Account Irregularities." The article was brief, but it mentioned Patricia Whitmore, then a junior partner at a mid-sized Houston law firm, receiving a formal reprimand for improper handling of client funds. She had a history of financial misconduct before she even met your father, Jessica said. This wasn't her first time stealing from people who trusted her. Victoria leaned forward, reading the article. This is huge. It establishes a pattern of behavior, shows premeditation. A prosecutor could use this to argue that the entire marriage was part of a long-term fraud scheme. The pieces were falling into place, but I still felt overwhelmed by the scope of what we were uncovering. Even if we have all this evidence, how do we use it? They have lawyers, connections, judges who owe them favors. We're 3 women with photocopies and spreadsheets. Actually, Victoria said with a small smile, we're 3 women with federal crimes and evidence of ongoing conspiracy. That changes the game considerably. She pulled out her phone and showed me a contact entry. Special Agent Rachel Morrison, FBI Financial Crimes Division. I've worked with her before on white-collar cases. She specializes in family-based financial fraud, cases exactly like this one. My stomach clenched. You want to involve the FBI? Elena, this is already federal jurisdiction, Victoria explained. The wire transfers across state lines, the shell companies in multiple states, the mail fraud, all of that falls under federal law. The question isn't whether to involve federal authorities. It's whether you want to be the one who brings them the evidence or wait for them to discover it some other way. Jessica closed her laptop and turned to face me. There's something else we need to discuss. I've been getting calls from other reporters, asking questions about your family. Word is starting to leak that something big is happening with Harrison Industries. What kind of questions? About irregularities in property transfers, about your grandmother's estate, about why you've suddenly disappeared from public view. Elena, I think someone else is investigating your family independently of what we're doing. The implications hit me like a truck. If other investigators were already looking into Harrison Industries, it meant my family's crimes might be exposed whether I acted or not. But it also meant I was running out of time to control the narrative and ensure justice was served properly. How long do we have? I asked Victoria. If the FBI is already investigating, anywhere from weeks to months before arrests start happening. If they're not, we could trigger an investigation that takes years to complete. Either way, the sooner we act, the better chance we have of protecting you and ensuring the evidence isn't destroyed. I walked to Jessica's window, looking out at the Houston skyline where Harrison Industries building dominated the downtown landscape. Somewhere in that tower, my father was probably conducting business as usual, unaware that his empire was about to come crashing down. The thought should have given me satisfaction, but instead I felt a strange kind of grief for the relationship we'd never actually had. There's one more thing, I said quietly. Grandma Rose mentioned something in her letter about other victims. She said Patricia's law firm had handled fraudulent transfers. What if we're not the only family this has happened to? Victoria and Jessica exchanged glances. That's a terrifying thought, Jessica said. But it would explain how they perfected the system. This could be much bigger than just your inheritance. Victoria was already reaching for her phone. I need to make some calls. If there are other victims, finding them could strengthen the case exponentially. It also means we're not just seeking justice for your family. We could be stopping an ongoing criminal enterprise. While Victoria stepped outside to make her calls, Jessica sat down next to me on the couch. How are you holding up? This is a lot to process. I keep thinking about all the times Patricia hugged me, told me she loved me like her own daughter. She was stealing from me the entire time, and I never suspected anything. How could I be so blind? You weren't blind, Jessica said firmly. You were a child, and then a young woman, trusting the adults who were supposed to protect you. That's normal. What's not normal is a stepmother who spends decades systematically stealing from her stepdaughter while pretending to love her. Victoria returned with a grim expression. Agent Morrison wants to meet with us tomorrow. She's been aware of irregularities surrounding Harrison Industries for months, but they haven't had enough evidence to open a formal investigation. What we've uncovered could be exactly what they need. The reality of what we were about to do hit me fully. Tomorrow, I would sit across from an FBI agent and provide evidence that would likely result in my father's arrest. My stepmother, who had tucked me into bed and helped with homework, would probably go to federal prison. Marcus, despite his role in the conspiracy, would lose everything he'd worked toward. Once we do this, there's no taking it back, I said. My family will be destroyed. Victoria's expression was compassionate but firm. Elena, your family destroyed itself when they chose to commit crimes for decades. You're not the one causing this. You're just the one brave enough to expose it. Jessica squeezed my hand. And think about your grandmother. She spent years knowing the truth, watching them profit from their crimes, unable to stop them. You have the chance to give her justice. That evening, I called the one person I thought might understand what I was going through. Aunt Sarah answered, on the first ring, her voice cautious. Elena, I was hoping you'd call. David told me about the dinner, about how upset you were. I feel terrible about everything. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Did you ever suspect that the property transfers weren't legitimate? There was a long pause. Elena, I can't discuss family business over the phone, but if you Really need to know the truth. There's someone you should meet. Someone who worked for your grandmother and knows things that might help you understand what really happened. Who? Margaret Sullivan. She was Rose's personal assistant and bookkeeper for 15 years. After Rose died, Patricia made sure Margaret was let go immediately, with a generous severance package and a non-disclosure agreement. But Margaret's getting old, and I think she's tired of carrying secrets. Sarah gave me Margaret's contact information and address. Elena, whatever you're planning to do, be careful. There are people who have a lot to lose if certain truths come out. That night, I barely slept. Tomorrow would bring the FBI meeting that could change everything. But first, I wanted to hear Margaret Sullivan's story. If there were details about Grandma Rose's final years that I didn't know, information that could strengthen our case or help me understand the full scope of what had been done to her, I needed to hear it. At dawn, I was already dressed and ready to drive to Margaret's house in suburban Pearland. Jessica insisted on coming with me, and we made the trip in nervous silence, both of us understanding that we were about to cross another point of no return. Margaret Sullivan lived in a modest ranch house with a garden that reminded me of Grandma Rose's backyard. She was waiting for us on the front porch, a woman in her 70s with silver hair and eyes that held decades of secrets. "You look just like your grandmother," she said as I approached. "Rose talked about you constantly, worried, about you every day. She knew what they were planning long before you were old enough to understand." We sat in her living room, surrounded by photos of gardens and grandchildren, while Margaret poured tea with hands that shook slightly from age or nerves. "Your grandmother tried to fight them," Margaret began. "She hired lawyers, demanded audits, and questioned every transaction. But they were always one step ahead, and they had legal expertise she didn't. Patricia knew exactly how to manipulate the system." "Why didn't anyone help her?" I asked. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Some of us tried. I kept copies of documents, tried to document what was happening. But we were just employees, and they had power. When Rose died, Patricia cleaned the house immediately. Anyone who might have had inconvenient information was let go." She disappeared into another room and returned with a cardboard box. "I kept these, even though I signed papers saying I wouldn't. Maybe I'm too old to care about legal threats anymore, or maybe I just couldn't let Rose down one more time." Inside, the box were personnel files, financial records, and correspondence that painted a picture of systematic intimidation and legal manipulation. Letters from Patricia's law firm threatening employees who asked questions, pay stubs showing generous bonuses for people who stayed quiet, and most damning of all, recorded phone conversations where Patricia and my father discussed which employees needed to be managed or removed. "She recorded phone calls?" Jessica asked. "Rose was smarter than they gave her credit for," Margaret said. "Toward the end, when she realized how extensive the fraud was, she started documenting everything. She knew she wouldn't live long enough to see justice, but she hoped someday you would be old enough and strong enough to finish what she started." I held one of the recordings, labeled in Grandma Rose's handwriting. "For Elena, when she's ready, to fight." The weight of that responsibility, the trust she'd placed in me from beyond the grave, settled on my shoulders like armor. Margaret walked us to the door, her expression determined despite her age. "Elena, your grandmother believed you had the strength to take them on. Don't let her down." As we drove back toward the city, Jessica navigated while I called Victoria to tell her about the new evidence. The FBI meeting was in 3 hours, and now we had even more ammunition for the fight ahead. "Are you ready for this?" Jessica asked as we pulled into the parking garage of the federal building. I thought about Grandma Rose, about all the years she'd suffered in silence while Patricia and my father stole her life's work. I thought about Margaret Sullivan, keeping secrets for decades because she was afraid to speak the truth. I thought about all the other potential victims who might still be suffering because these criminals had never been stopped. "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I meant it completely. The FBI field office felt like stepping into another world. Gone were the mahogany panels and crystal chandeliers of my family's domain, replaced by functional government furniture and the quiet hum of serious work being done. Special Agent Rachel Morrison met us in a conference room lined with whiteboards and filing cabinets, her presence commanding despite her modest height. "Ms. Harrison," Agent Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had taken down much more powerful criminals than my family. "Before we begin, I want you to understand that what you're about to tell me could result in federal charges against your father, stepmother, and potentially others. Are you prepared for that reality?" I looked at the boxes of evidence we'd brought, at Victoria's meticulously prepared financial analysis, at Jessica's investigative notes. "Agent Morrison, they've been stealing from me and potentially others for decades. I'm not just prepared for charges, I'm demanding them." For the next 4 hours, we laid out the entire conspiracy. Agent Morrison listened without interruption as I explained the timeline, the forged documents, the shell companies, and the systematic theft of my inheritance. Victoria presented her financial analysis, showing how money had been laundered through multiple entities to hide its origins. Jessica shared her research into Patricia's background and the potential for other victims. When we finished, Agent Morrison sat back in her chair, her expression unreadable. "This is the most comprehensive financial fraud case I've seen in 15 years. Ms. Harrison, I need to ask you directly. Are you willing to wear a wire?" The question hit me like electricity. "You want me to record conversations with my family?" "We have enough evidence to begin an investigation, but proving conspiracy requires demonstrating ongoing criminal activity. If you could get them to discuss the fraud, especially any current efforts to hide assets or destroy evidence, it would make our case airtight." Jessica leaned forward. "Is that safe? They've already been threatening Elena." Agent Morrison's expression was serious. "It carries risks, but we'd have surveillance teams in place. The bigger risk is doing nothing and allowing them to move assets offshore or destroy evidence before we can act." I thought about Grandma Rose, about all the years she'd suffered knowing the truth but being powerless to prove it. "What would I need to do? Visit your family, act like you're considering accepting their job offer, let them think you're backing down. People who believe they've won often become careless about what they say." Victoria pulled out her phone to check the time. "Elena, there's something else you should know. I've been monitoring Harrison Industries' bank accounts, and there's been unusual activity in the last 48 hours. Large transfers to offshore accounts, liquidation of some assets. I think they know an investigation is coming." Agent Morrison's expression darkened. "How much are we talking about?" 20 million, possibly more. If they're moving money out of the country, we need to act quickly before they can hide everything beyond our reach." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. My family wasn't just covering up past crimes. They were actively working to ensure they could escape justice entirely. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll wear the wire." Agent Morrison nodded approvingly. "We'll need 24 hours to set everything up. In the meantime, I need you to act completely normal. Don't change your routine. Don't contact family members. Don't do anything that might tip them off." As we prepared to leave, Agent Morrison handed me her card. "Ms. Harrison, what you're doing takes tremendous courage. Your grandmother would be proud." The next day passed in a blur of preparation and nervous energy. FBI technicians fitted me with a nearly invisible recording device, teaching me how to position myself for optimal sound quality and how to guide conversations toward incriminating topics. Jessica stayed with me the entire time, helping me practice responses and keeping me calm. "Remember," Victoria coached me, "they're more likely to incriminate themselves if they think you're genuinely considering their offer. Act conflicted, like you're torn between loyalty and suspicion." The plan was simple. I would call Marcus and tell him I'd reconsidered the corporate position, asked to meet with him and Patricia to discuss details. The FBI would monitor from nearby vehicles, ready to intervene if anything went wrong. At 3:00, I called Marcus from my apartment while FBI agents listened from a van parked across the street. "Elena?" Marcus sounded surprised. "I didn't expect to hear from you." "I've been thinking about the position Dad offered," I said, letting uncertainty creep into my voice. Maybe I was too hasty in dismissing it. "Could we meet to discuss the details?" There was a pause. Then Marcus's voice became warmer. "Of course. Patricia's been hoping you'd reconsider. Why don't you come by the house tonight? Dad's at a board meeting, but Patricia and I can go over everything with you." The house looked the same as always when I pulled into the circular driveway that evening, but everything felt different knowing what I now knew about the people inside. The FBI surveillance team was positioned around the neighborhood, invisible, but reassuring. Patricia answered the door in casual elegance, her smile seeming genuine despite everything I knew about her. "Elena, I'm so glad you called. Marcus told me you want to discuss the position." We settled in the living room where I'd spent countless family evenings, the familiarity of the space making the deception even more surreal. Marcus poured wine, while Patricia arranged herself gracefully on the sofa, every movement calculated to project warmth and trustworthiness. "I have to admit," I began carefully, "I've been confused about some things. The trust fund amount seems smaller than I expected, and I've been wondering about Grandma Rose's estate settlement." Patricia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Elena, your grandmother's finances were quite complicated toward the end. The recession hit her investments hard, and there were significant debts to settle." "But what about the Rosewood mansion? I remember her talking about it like it was still in the family." Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances, a split-second communication that the recording device hopefully captured. "The mansion had to be sold," Marcus said. "It was hemorrhaging money and needed extensive renovations. The sale proceeds barely covered the outstanding liens." I leaned forward, projecting confusion rather than accusation. "It's just strange, because I drove by there recently and it looks like it's being used for events. The current owners seem to be doing well with it." Patricia's laugh was musical but strained. "Elena, I think you're overthinking this. Your grandmother made some unfortunate business decisions, and your father spent years cleaning up the mess. The important thing is securing your future, not dwelling on the past." "I suppose you're right," I said, then took a calculated risk. Although I did find some old papers in my apartment, documents with signatures that looked different from what I remember. Maybe I'm just being paranoid. The change in the room's atmosphere was immediate and electric. Marcus set down his wine, glass with deliberate care, while Patricia's smile became frozen, artificial. "What kind of documents?" Patricia asked, her voice carefully controlled. "Property transfers, investment authorizations, things like that. Probably nothing important, but some of the signatures looked strange to me." Marcus leaned forward. "Elena, where exactly did you find these papers?" The question confirmed what I'd suspected. They knew about documents they thought they'd successfully hidden or destroyed. I could practically feel the FBI agents listening intently from their surveillance positions. "They were mixed in with some of Mom's old things," I lied smoothly. "I probably should have gone through that stuff years ago, but you know how it is, with grief." Patricia stood and walked to the window, her back to us. When she turned around, her expression had hardened into something I'd never seen before. "Elena, I think we need to have a very honest conversation. These questions you've been asking, this sudden interest in old family business, it's concerning. Frankly, it's making your father and me wonder if you're emotionally stable enough for a corporate position." The attack was swift and brutal, designed to make me question my own perceptions. But knowing what I knew, having the evidence I had, her manipulation felt like watching a magic trick after someone had explained how it worked. "I'm just trying to understand my family's history," I said, letting hurt creep into my voice. "I thought that was normal." Marcus joined Patricia near the window, and I realized they were positioning themselves between me and the door. The subtle threat sent adrenaline coursing through my system. Normal would be accepting that people who love you have made difficult decisions to protect your interests, Patricia said. Normal would be trusting that your father knows what's best for this family. What if I wanted to see the original documents from Grandma Rose's estate? I asked. Just to put my mind at ease? Patricia's mask finally slipped completely. Those documents are confidential legal matters. Elena, I'm starting to think you need professional help dealing with your grief and paranoia. Perhaps a psychiatric evaluation would be beneficial. The threat was clear. Continue asking questions, and they'd have me declared mentally incompetent, just as they'd done to Grandma Rose. But this time, there were federal agents recording every word. You think I'm mentally ill because I'm asking about my inheritance? I stood up, letting anger show. Because I want to understand what happened to property that should have been mine? Marcus stepped closer, his voice taking on a warning tone. Elena, you're getting worked up over nothing. There is no missing inheritance. Grandma Rose died with debts, not assets. Then why are you both so nervous about me seeing the paperwork? Patricia's composure cracked further. Because we've worked very hard to build this family's reputation, and we won't let paranoid accusations destroy what we've accomplished. Elena, if you continue down this path, you'll find that family loyalty has limits. The threat was explicit now, recorded clearly on the device I wore. I pushed further, knowing I might not get another chance. What if I hired my own lawyer to look into the estate settlement? What if I demanded an audit of all the property transfers? The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and Patricia stared at each other, having a wordless conversation about how far they were willing to go to protect their secrets. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice cold as winter. Elena, if you take that path, you'll discover that legal. Battles are expensive, time-consuming, and often unsuccessful. You'll also discover that sometimes it's better to be grateful for what you have, rather than demanding what you think you deserve. Is that a threat? It's advice, Marcus said, from people who have been protecting you your entire life. Elena, walk away from this. Take the job offer, live comfortably on your trust fund, and stop asking questions that don't have good answers. Looked around the room where I'd grown up, at these people who had raised me while systematically stealing from me, and felt a profound sadness for what could have been. What if I can't do that? I asked quietly. What if I need to know the truth? Patricia's smile returned, but it was predatory now. Then you'll learn why some truths are better left buried. Elena, your grandmother tried to fight us, and look how that ended for her. She died bitter, alone, and convinced of conspiracies that existed only in her declining mind. The casual cruelty of using Grandma Rose's death as a threat made my blood boil, but I forced myself to stay calm. The recording device was capturing everything, building an airtight case against them. I should go, I said, moving toward the door. I need time to think about everything you've said. Patricia blocked my path one more time. Elena, I hope you make the right choice, for everyone's sake. As I walked to my car, my hands shaking with adrenaline and rage, I could feel their eyes, watching me from the window. The FBI surveillance team would follow me to a safe location where Agent Morrison was waiting to review the recording. Behind me, the house that had once been my home stood like a monument to lies and stolen dreams. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew justice was coming. The recording device had captured everything we needed to prove conspiracy, ongoing criminal activity, and explicit threats. Patricia and Marcus had no idea that their own words had just sealed their fate. The war they'd thought they'd won was about to become their complete destruction. The safe house where Agent Morrison debriefed me felt like waking up from a nightmare into harsh fluorescent reality. The recording device had captured everything we needed: conspiracy, ongoing fraud, witness intimidation, and explicit threats. As I listened to my own voice playing back through government speakers, I barely recognized the calm, strategic woman who had manipulated her family into confessing their crimes. "This is exactly what we needed," Agent Morrison said, reviewing the transcript. "Your stepmother admitted to controlling documents. Your brother acknowledged hiding property transfers, and both of them threatened you directly. Combined with Victoria's financial evidence, we have enough for federal conspiracy charges." Jessica squeezed my hand. "How long before arrests happen?" 48 hours, Agent Morrison replied. "We move at dawn on Friday. By then we'll have warrants for your father, stepmother, and brother, plus freezing orders for all assets connected to the shell companies." 2 days. In 2 days, my family would wake up to federal agents at their door, their world collapsing, in the way mine had at my birthday party. But unlike my humiliation, their downfall would be public, permanent, and entirely justified. "What about the other victims Victoria mentioned?" I asked. Agent Morrison pulled out a thick file. "We've identified at least 6 other families who were defrauded using similar methods. Patricia's law firm developed this as a systematic operation targeting wealthy elderly clients. Your grandmother's case was just the largest and most sophisticated. The scope of their crimes kept expanding. This wasn't just about my inheritance. Patricia had spent decades perfecting a system for stealing from vulnerable families. How many other grandchildren had grown up believing they were lucky to receive modest trust funds, never knowing millions had been stolen from them?" Victoria arrived that evening with updates on the asset recovery efforts. "We've managed to freeze most of the offshore accounts before they could complete the transfers. Elena, once the criminal cases are resolved, you'll likely recover the vast majority of what was stolen from you." The financial vindication felt less important than I'd expected. Yes, I would finally have the wealth that should have been mine, all along, but more importantly, Grandma Rose would finally have justice. The woman who had spent her final years being gaslit and dismissed as mentally incompetent would be vindicated as the sharp, protective grandmother who had seen through their lies from the beginning. Friday morning arrived gray and drizzly, Houston, weather that matched my somber mood despite the justice being served. I wasn't allowed to witness the arrests directly, but Agent Morrison called me as each one was executed. Patricia Whitmore Harrison, arrested at 6:15 a.m. on federal charges of conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering, Agent Morrison reported. She tried to claim diplomatic immunity as the wife of a business leader. It didn't work. The second call came an hour later. Marcus Harrison, arrested at Harrison Industries headquarters. He was attempting to access safety deposit boxes when our agents arrived. We recovered additional forged documents he was apparently trying to destroy. The final call was the hardest to receive. William Harrison, arrested at the family residence. He invoked his right to counsel immediately and refused to make any statements. My father, the man who had taught me to ride horses and helped with algebra homework, was now in federal custody facing decades in prison. The complexity of my emotions surprised me. Relief, vindication, and grief all warred for dominance in my chest. The story broke on Houston news channels by noon. Prominent oil executive arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme dominated headlines, with my family's mugshots broadcast across the city, where they'd once been social royalty. The reporter standing outside Harrison Industries headquarters explained how the FBI had uncovered a decades-long conspiracy to defraud elderly clients and family members of their rightful inheritances. Jessica arrived at the safe house with newspapers and her laptop, monitoring social media for reactions. "The business community is in shock," she reported. "Harrison Industries stock has been suspended from trading, and the board called an emergency meeting to discuss leadership succession." "What about public opinion?" I asked. "Mixed. Some people are expressing sympathy for you, calling you brave for exposing family corruption. Others are criticizing you for destroying your own family. There's a lot of debate about whether blood loyalty should override legal obligations. The criticism stung, but I'd expected it. In a city where family businesses were practically sacred, turning in your own father and stepmother for federal crimes would always be controversial. Some would see me as a hero. Others would view me as a traitor who chose money over family bonds. Agent Morrison returned that afternoon with updates on the investigation's expansion. The evidence you provided has opened up 3 other federal cases. We're looking at Patricia's former law partners, several judges who may have been corrupted, and a network of financial advisors who helped launder the stolen assets. The realization that our investigation had exposed a much larger criminal enterprise made the personal cost feel more worthwhile. This wasn't just about my inheritance anymore. It was about dismantling a system that had victimized families across Houston for decades. A week later, I sat in the offices of Morrison, Hughes & Associates, the law firm now representing me in civil asset recovery proceedings. The lead attorney, Janet Morrison, shared a name but no relation with the FBI agent who had helped build our case. Elena, we're looking at recovering approximately $85 million in assets, plus accumulated interest and damages, Janet explained. However, the civil proceedings will take months, possibly years to fully resolve. What about the mansion? The Rosewood Mansion will revert to your ownership once the court validates your grandmother's original will. The current event bookings will honor their contracts, but all future revenue will belong to you. I thought about Grandma Rose's letter, her instruction to not let anyone take the house from me. Soon I would hold the deed to the property she had fought so desperately to protect. The criminal trial began 6 months later in federal district court. I testified for 3 days, walking the jury through the timeline of fraud, the forged signatures, and the systematic gaslighting I'd endured. The hardest part was playing the recording from my wire, hearing Patricia and Marcus threaten me while 12 strangers listened to my family's casual cruelty. Patricia's defense team tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter motivated by greed, a young woman who had fabricated evidence to steal money from her loving family. But Victoria's forensic accounting and Margaret Sullivan's testimony about the intimidation Grandma Rose had faced painted a clear picture of decades-long criminal conspiracy. Marcus pled guilty to conspiracy charges in exchange for a reduced sentence and cooperation with prosecutors. His testimony against Patricia and my father sealed their fate, detailing how they had planned the fraudulent transfers years before executing them. The verdicts came on a cold December morning, almost exactly a year after my disastrous birthday party. Patricia, guilty on all counts, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. My father, guilty of conspiracy and fraud, sentenced to 12 years. Marcus, 5 years for his cooperation and lesser role in the conspiracy. I felt no satisfaction watching my father led away in handcuffs, only a profound sadness for what our family could have been if greed hadn't poisoned everything. But I also felt something else: completion. The promise I'd made to Grandma Rose's memory had been fulfilled. The Rosewood Mansion became mine on a sunny spring morning when the final court order was signed. I drove there alone, parking in the circular driveway, where I'd watched strangers profit from my stolen inheritance for so many years. The house was magnificent, even more beautiful than I'd remembered from childhood glimpses. The colonial revival architecture, the mature gardens, the wraparound porches that begged for summer evenings and sweet tea. This was what Grandma Rose had fought to preserve, not just a building but a piece of our family's authentic history. I found Margaret Sullivan waiting for me in the garden, her silver hair catching the sunlight as she tended to rose bushes that looked remarkably like the ones from my grandmother's backyard. I planted these after the court gave me permission to maintain the grounds, Margaret explained. Rose varieties that your grandmother loved. I thought she'd want them here when you finally came home. We walked through the mansion together, room by room, as Margaret shared stories about Grandma Rose's plans for the property. How she'd wanted to turn it into a community center for elderly residents, a place where seniors could gather for meals and activities instead of being isolated in nursing homes. She had such dreams for this place, Margaret said, as we stood in the grand ballroom where my birthday party should have been celebrated with joy instead of betrayal. Dreams that went far beyond just preserving family wealth. Standing in that ballroom, I realized what I wanted to do with my recovered inheritance. Not just live in the mansion, but fulfill Grandma Rose's vision for it. The Rosewood Community Center would provide services for seniors, including legal aid to help elderly people protect themselves from the kind of financial fraud that had nearly destroyed our family. The transformation took 6 months. The mansion's grand rooms were converted into meeting spaces, dining areas, and activity centers. The gardens became therapeutic spaces where seniors could work with plants and enjoy Houston's mild weather. Most importantly, we established a legal clinic staffed by attorneys who specialized in elder fraud, helping families recognize and fight the kind of schemes Patricia had perfected. On opening day, I stood on the front steps wearing a yellow dress that reminded me of Grandma Rose's favorite sun hat, watching as the first residents arrived for the community center's inaugural luncheon. Margaret Sullivan, now the center's volunteer coordinator, greeted each person with the same warmth she'd shown me during our secret meetings. Jessica arrived with her camera, documenting the opening for a follow-up story about the aftermath of the Harrison Industries scandal. "How does it feel?" she asked as we watched elderly residents exploring their new community space. "Like I finally understand what Grandma Rose meant when she said some things are worth more than money," I replied. She didn't just want me to recover what was stolen. She wanted me to use it for something meaningful. The civil lawsuit settlements had made me one of the wealthiest young women in Houston, but the wealth felt different now. It wasn't about luxury or status. It was about responsibility and justice. Every dollar recovered from Patricia's shell companies became a tool for protecting other families from similar predators. Uncle David attended the opening ceremony, one of the few family members who had apologized for his role in the conspiracy. He'd received immunity in exchange for testimony about the legal documents he'd signed, but the guilt had aged him considerably. "Elena, I know I can never make up for what I did," he said as we watched his own mother enjoy the activities we'd created in her memory. "But I want you to know that Rose would be so proud of what you've built here." As the sun set over the mansion gardens, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that reminded me of Grandma Rose's favorite flowers, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since childhood. The key she'd given me hadn't just unlocked a safety deposit box, it had unlocked the strength to fight for justice and the wisdom to use victory compassionately. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Morrison. "Saw the news coverage of the community center opening. Your grandmother's spirit of justice lives. On. Well done." I walked through the mansion one more time that evening, running my hands along the mahogany railings and admiring the restored original fixtures. In the main parlor, I'd hung a portrait of Grandma Rose in her garden, surrounded by the roses she'd loved so much. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Rose McKenna Harrison. She never stopped fighting for what was right." The house was no longer just mine. It belonged to the community, to the seniors who needed a safe place to gather, to the families who needed help protecting themselves from financial predators. Grandma Rose's legacy wasn't just about preserving wealth. It was about using that wealth to make the world more just. Standing in the garden where Margaret had planted roses in my grandmother's memory, I whispered the words I'd been wanting to say for over a year. "We did it, Grandma. We made them pay and we made it count." The roses swayed in the evening breeze, and for a moment, I could almost hear her voice on the wind, telling me she was proud, telling me the fight had been worth it, telling me that justice and love were the only inheritances that truly mattered. My father was wrong at my birthday party. I didn't die broke. Instead, I lived rich in ways he never understood, surrounded by a community built on the foundation of his defeated greed. The last laugh, it turned out, belonged to the woman in boots who refused to stay silent about the truth. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.